Does the online feel worse on PS4 on a stage like this, where parts of floors and walls break off? I don't know. I never played on PS4 because I hate it. You're correct and wrong at the same time. In my opinion, the requirements is based on the game. What do you mean? I like having this discussion, so I'm open to hearing you guys out on it. Like, a lot of this that I'm talking about right now is just my, you know, basically theories and hypotheses, right? Based on all the research I've done the past week about this. Yeah, Bud Mike Miko says, I was wondering if some of the physics are being done by CPU causing me to be able to focus less on rollback if that's what it's using. That's interesting. So Kakarot says the GGPO netcode has requirements and the game needs to be able to make things like the game loop run without being dependent on other parts of the game. There's a tweet on this. I'll find it for you. I already read the tweet. It's from, God, what is his name? It's like CM Zinak or something like that, right? Yeah, but basically, when you say the GGPO netcode, it's not just GGPO. It's anything that has rollback, right? And GGPO was maybe the first that popularized rollback netcode. But when you look at like NRS's rollback netcode, it's not GGPO. They've just used this. What do you call it? It's like a template, right, of how to do something. What do you call that? It's like a design pattern almost. What's a good analogy for this? I guess if netcodes were cars, you could have like, you know, a manual and automatic, or you have an electric car, you know? Yeah, it's a concept. They took GGPO and modified it to their needs. That's not exactly true either, right? Like, they took the ideas of GGPO. It's a bad analogy, is it? Yeah, it's probably a bad analogy. It's something. It's hard to make an analogy for it. Analog cars. I mean, it's kind of like it's actually not a bad analogy, because it's kind of like, you know, when electric cars came out, like there was a Prius, you know, and the Prius was GGPO, but now like other car manufacturers can make electric cars, you know, and they're not all fucking Priuses, right? They're just taking the concept of an electric car or a hybrid car, you know, and they're making it their own. So it's the same kind of whatever the fuck you call that. You know, concept? I guess it's a concept, right? It's their implementation of a concept. There's other differences between Tech 2 and Tech 7, different console architecture, different engine that might factor into this. Yes, that's a huge factor too, right? I forgot to mention that. But like Tech 2, they had their own engine, and then with Tekken 7, they went to Unreal Engine, which has its own, you know, different set of everything. Gale Dribble says, yeah, too many people think GGPO is the same thing as rollback netcode when it's just a type of rollback netcode. Right. And GGPO is the most popular one because it's all everyone ever hears about, right? And if you're a developer and you've never done any kind of rollback netcode, then yeah, you should try out GGPO because it's already built. You know, it's already been tested. It's already been tuned, essentially. But the very interesting thing is, anyone who's interested in this should really watch the GDC video. I think I have it right here. Watch this. I'll show it to you guys right here. I still have it open, right? Because I have a billion tabs open. It's right here. It's called 8 frames in 16 milliseconds, I think, right? Networking Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat Injustice 2. This is from GDC YouTube channel. I'm going to put the link in the chat if anyone's interested in looking this up for themselves. It's a ton of work. This is a great resource to watch through, to see all the work that NRS did to make this work. It's fantastic. And like, even though I had heard the fundamentals of rollback before this, this took it to a whole new level of understanding. And when I watched this is what inspired me to actually try to implement it myself for a console, to like have like a Tekken 3 whatever, right? And like, I thought, you know, after I watched this whole thing, I'm like, dude, this is crazy. Like, they've basically given you all the information that you need to, as a programmer, to say like, okay, I understand this concept now and I can implement it myself. Like, they give you everything there. So if you are, and then after I start bringing stuff, this is the craziest part to me, right? Like, I started looking into this, you know, people start messaging the Guilty Gear developers. I guess that's actually where it started. The Guilty Gear developers, I think it's Guilty Gear, not Guilty Gear, I take it back, sorry. Uniclear developer made a tweet saying like, where's GGPO's website? I can't find it. And I saw through that link the Evo panel discussion about GGPO. I went there and I watched that. Somebody links me to this thing. I watched this. I talked to the canons and I'm like, dude, like, how does this work? You know, like, should this work for Tekken? And they're like, yeah, it should, yada yada. And then I'm like thinking about finding an emulator that plays Tekken 3 and modifying it to have rollback networking. And then, if you guys haven't heard, this past week, since we had the Boomcast last Thursday, in this past week since then, right, this is when all this happened, the canons have released GGPO open source now. So now it's like, wow, anyone can take it, right? And it's a free license. All you have to do is give them credit for using it. So I think that they recognized that, you know, they can't really monetize GGPO significantly, and they might as well just make it available for everyone, you know, because companies like NRS are already implementing their own rollback that is not GGPO, that's already incredible. So yeah, basically, it's a good time. It's a good time for netcode. And now that I've read this, I'm so curious to know if this has another name, rollback netcode, you know, or rollback networking. I wonder if it has a different terminology to describe it that other companies use, or if it's just what we've heard because we're all familiar with GGPO, you know, as fighting game players. Can it be used outside of fighting games too? Yes. Negative latency, yeah, if you guys haven't heard about that, negative latency is something that Google Stadia is it Stadia or Stadia? I don't know, but they're touting that as a feature. Google Stadia is a streaming service, so you can play games remotely, right? Like, you don't have to own a console, you don't have to own the games. You're just paying a monthly service for this platform that uses cloud computing to stream the games to you. And everyone's like, well, isn't that going to have lag, whatever? And they're claiming that they have negative latency. In a couple of years, they will have negative latency, and it'll be more responsive than your home console experience. It's going to be more responsive than your home console experience. Better than playing offline. How the fuck can it be better than playing offline? They're morons, number one. Like, the best it could be is as good, right? But reading about it, the idea is the same as rollback netcoding. They're using machine learning to predict all your possible inputs, potentially use the cloud computing to run all the inputs at the same time, and then send you the one and roll back to the one you actually input, right? And like, so that's what they're not saying, but that's the only way that that works, is if they're able to roll back to what you actually pressed. And so, yeah, I really highly recommend this video. It basically explains the whole concept to you about rollback networking. It's a very, very good resource. And yeah, somebody asked, I think Narnagi asked, you know, can this work for non-fighting games? Yeah, it definitely could. Someone who wasn't into fighting games thought that they were saying was that the game can play by itself. Yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, man. GGPO guesses your next input if the connection drops, right? How sick would it be if it used machine learning to know about your tendencies? It's really hard to say. And it's not if your connection drops. It's constantly guessing your input. And basically it's like, it doesn't even really have to. Like, you can guess anything, really, right? Like, you can make an educated guess. Like, if I was building a fighting game, like, with rollback netcode, my first guess would be to, like, guess the player hit back to block back, you know? Or if you're Street Fighter, maybe they hit down back to block that way. You know, because as a player, what's going to be the most frustrating thing if you get hit, right, then it rolls back? But you're like, God damn it, I was blocking, you know? Like, so if anything, if the netcode is incorrect, you'll be like, what the fuck, I blocked? Wait, I blocked and I didn't mean to block, you know? That'll be the downside, that you're blocking better than you should be. Yeah, when the machine fails to predict correctly, it rolls back, exactly. And that's, like, in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Capcom used a rollback netcode that was terrible. And one of the things I didn't consider about rollback netcode at the time, or ever, was sound, right? Because say the machine thinks you did this, and a sound effect happens, right? The sound effect, you cannot roll back a sound effect. Once a sound effect starts playing, like, how do you stop it and roll back to when it didn't start playing yet? You're obviously going to hear it, right? So it's very complicated. Sound is complicated. Particles are complicated. Cinematics are also complicated. So like supers or what you call it? I was really curious about Tekken 7 slow-mo. I was like, what do you do in Tekken 7 slow-mo? Is that better or worse for rollback? They probably ignore it, right? Like if a slow-mo is triggered, they have to assume that they've had the right inputs, or they have to know that their inputs are correct before they start a slow-mo. Yeah, rolling back graphics and sound are hard. Yeah, false KOs. Oh, that's the other thing. You know, I don't know if you guys have seen the clips on that come up from Mortal Kombat 11, but there are like brutalities that happen that trigger the brutality or whatever, but then the fight is still happening, you know? And it's like, what the fuck? It's because the rollback happens, you know? And it's like, oh shit, that wasn't supposed to trigger, but the screen turning black and putting up the brutality thing triggers already, and then the game rollback, they're still fighting and shit. So there are stuff like that happens. Isn't that like Fightcade, false KOs? Yeah, probably, because Fightcade is the original version of it's the reverse engineered version of GGPO. Yeah, and Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which is what I was saying. If you guys play Street Fighter Cross Tekken online, you know there was a ton, and I mean a ton, of netcode problems. Like, the sound would literally drop out. Like, completely drop out. And you'd be like, what the hell? Like, you just threw like a fireball, and they wouldn't say Hadouken and shit. You know, you're like, what the fuck? It was just like a terrible experience, you know? So, let's assume Tekken 7 has rollback in it, right? I would say they took a very safe approach, right? So that we don't get as much visual artifacting, we don't get sound artifacting and dropping out, etc. This is the tweet. All right, let me take a look at this tweet. All right, so can I actually talk for an extended period? Again, instead of making one up, so let's talk a little bit more about GGPO and rollback netcode implementing. There's a tendency to either frame GGPO as some sort of drop-in magic that will make your game better immediately, which is false, correct, or as basically useless because the majority of the work is still on the developers, which is also false, I feel. Yeah, I agree with all this. GGPO does satisfactorily handle the network side, but to fully implement the rollback style network model, you must also have a fully deterministic game, which means that all your inputs will always result in the same outputs. Your game update loop must be safely re-entrant. Yeah. Visual and audio errors must be accounted for. Correct. None of this is trivial. Correct. So, if you guys watched that video about NRS's implementation of all this, it's a lot of work to re-engineer all of this. Fully deterministic game means that for the same inputs, your game will always have the same output. That's what I said. This is only really viable for games that do not transmit state directly, just that will cause state changes inputs. Yeah, so for NRS's netcode, they only transmit inputs, which is pretty interesting. So they don't transmit any other info other than player X hit this direction or this button. And that's it. This means all data about the current game's position must be accounted for, and the logic must be consistent. If you intend on having crossplay with other platforms, compilers can generate slightly different code, which is trouble. So yeah, this could be very interesting for, when people talk about the crossplay thing that just happened. Very interesting, right? Which is why I don't think we're going to get crossplay for Tekken, unfortunately. But you never know. Maybe they're already coded in a way where it will be okay. Every input delay game must be deterministic, so pretty much all fighting games have this covered. This, however, would be particularly difficult for a lot of games that have either a lot of state or rely heavily on floating point values. Every input delay game must be deterministic. Input delay game. I don't know what that means specifically for why fighting games have that versus other games. This deterministic state needs to be able to be stored and restored like a save game every single frame. You cannot miss a single value. You can't cause too much performance. You cannot cause too much performance, which is why I was saying that it's very heavy on your CPU to do this. Which is why I think that the PC netcode feels better than the PS4. If you don't build with that in mind, you will have a serious goose chase on your hands. Yeah. The performance profiling that NRS did to make it work is like super impressive, actually. Game must be re-entrant. This means that your game has to be structured so that you can run an update without affecting external things like video and sound. Yes. Separating game logic and game visuals is not always viable, especially in modern 3D engines. Again, if you haven't built for it from the beginning, separating these two can be difficult at best. It's not terribly hard in 2D games to just not draw things, but 3D games often make heavy use of stateful information, and it would need to be fully separated. So basically, a lot of work. At this point, you give rolling back properly and it's playable, woo. Except now you got visual and audio errors everywhere. A sound is rolled back over and should never have been played, but it's still playing. What do I do? Unlike a traditional game, you now have to keep full track of not just every sound you play, but the status of every sound that has been played, and whether or not it's been cancelled out by things that occurred in the rollback. That's not easy to do. It's not. There's a lot of ways to approach audio falling out of sync with the expected result, but ultimately often we're going to involve drastically more work than just playing sounds. Many visual effects the same way, like particles. So while GGPO does handle the network side of things correctly, there's a huge burden on the developer to do a lot of these things and to do a lot of them right from day one, because retrofitting these things is often a lot of work. Which is why once you do it the first time, you can use it again, right? Like, here's the thing. It is a ton of work. Like, now that I've done the research on this, it is an incredible amount of work. For NetherRealm, I think they had a team of 12 people, and it took them 9 months. Okay, like, it's not easy. But the benefit is that once you have it done and you're like, have it really good, it's basically good to go for your next games because the architecture stays the same, right? So it's a lot of work, but once you have this set up in the right way, you're basically on the path to success and for your future games, you know? I know that as players, we know what we want. As devs, we struggle with both what we want to give and what we're capable of doing. So I really generally ask that people be patient with everyone involved. The only way to do a lot of this is hard work and a lot of time. That's all I have to say on it. I wrote an article some years back that I'm told is of a lot of help for people understanding rollback networking itself, the magic of GGPO itself, and I hope that helps some people. P.S. Don't believe Stadia's lies. That is awesome. That's basically exactly what we were saying a second ago. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Let me see this article, because, oh yeah, I actually read this article. This is actually the article that I read originally. When I was first trying to understand rollback networking, I read this article. And it's a very good article, but it's still not as clear to me. Like, after I read this article, I was still like a little unclear on how exactly this worked. But when you watch the other video, when you watch this GDC video, they have really good examples that are video examples. Let me see if I can pull one up really quick. Watch this.
There, and there's just frame by frame for each guy. On frame 1, we get a pad input. Somebody's pressing X for frame 8. This is what I mean by lockstep. This is what I mean by input latency. That button that was pressed on frame 1 will be executed on frame 8. So if you look at Batman and Superman, they're not moving, right? They're just standing there because even though you press the button, we won't respond for 7 more frames. Player 2 received this input on frame 6, still nobody moving. They will respond to this on frame 8. And they'll do it at the same time. The effect is pretty subtle, but Superman started to punch. So that's lockstep. That was lockstep with a 7-frame input delay. Because we had dynamic input latency, that could vary. It could be 5 frames, it could be 15 frames, depending on the network latency you're experiencing. 15 frames is extreme.
Let's see if he talks about the rollback one now.
The present. This is where we are today. Mortal Kombat X and Injustice 2 have 3 frames of input latency and support up to 10 frames, 333 milliseconds, of network latency before pausing the game. The online experience is much improved and the players are happy. So it's 3 fixed frames of input latency. We do that to help cover network latency. It's, if I haven't made it clear, it is constant, which means it is completely predictable to the players. And our previous title would fluctuate between 5 and 20 frames. The next question would be, why 10 frames? This is a latency curve.
This is cool too.
This is the graph of a percentage of matches played at a certain RTT bucket. So on the left, the numbers or the labels are very, very small. But on the left, you have an extremely low latency connection. On the right, you have 300 milliseconds plus. You can see that the vast majority of matches are played under 300 milliseconds RTT. What's not actually shown here is there could be even one more bucket there for like 300 to 333, and we capture that bucket as well.
So basically, they were testing to see how many players at what latency are all their matches, right? So most players here are like pretty good in terms of ping, right? But then they still have players all the way up to like 300. So that's what they're showing.
By supporting 333 milliseconds round trip time,
which modifier is the best netcode right now? Mortal Kombat 11.
Quick definition or background on what rollback is. We only send pad data. That's still true. I keep calling that out because a lot of dead.
Narnog said, doesn't this make patching in rollback netcode a bitch though? Yes, by far. But what I was trying to say earlier is I think Tekken 7 and Tekken Tech 2 already have rollback netcode. So it's not about rebuilding the whole system from scratch. If anything, it's about improving it. You know, improving what they currently have, which may not be possible if they're limited by the hardware in something like the PS4.
Reckoning solutions will send a lot of game state.
Also, I want to say, do you guys remember when we had that patch and I was talking about like, why is my game lagging now? This is a game I've run the same way for multiple years. I've never had a lag. Why is it lagging now? That could be a different netcode as well, like, right? Because I'm talking about if it's using up more CPU than it was previously to run the newer version of the netcode, essentially, because it's storing more states across the way or something per frame, then it could have an impact on performance. Something I hadn't considered before until I watched all this.
Back and forth, we don't. We just send pad data. The game will proceed without remote input, and when remote input is received, we will roll back and then simulate forward.
That's the general gist
Same
of
diagram as before.
rollback overall.
This time for rollback.
So watch this. I'm pretty sure this is the video part where it shows frame by frame the rollback thing. Watch this.
So yeah, this is the same thing, but with rollback networking. So on frame 1, input is generated for frame 4. The idea here is that we're seeing this with the same network latency that I showed you with the lockstep. So the packet's coming across for frame 4. Player 1 already hit frame 4, so his Superman started punching. But player 2 doesn't know that yet, so he's not moving. By the time that gets received,
do you see this? How the left Superman's already, his arm is already back, but this player 2's screen, his arm hasn't even moved yet, right?
On player 2's end, it's frame 6 already. He's 2 frames behind. He just got data for frame 4. So frame 4 here is our confirmed frame. We have input from both players for frame 4. So we take that back to frame 4. We would call that a rollback. That's a rollback or a restore to previous state. We'll simulate frame 4, we'll simulate frame 5, and we will simulate our real tick or our render tick frame 6. We will do all of that within 1 frame's worth of time.
So that's the part that takes a lot of CPU power, because they have to roll back and simulate the game state across those multiple frames without updating the graphics or anything. You know what I mean? So those simulations frames are the ones that cost your CPU when you're trying to roll back. So what I was saying is maybe hypothetically, right? I have no evidence about this, but maybe the PS4 can only roll back X number of frames while the PC can roll back more frames. Do you know what I mean? And maybe that's why the experience feels worse than it does on this one. Maybe something like that. Like, there's a lot of other factors that could be in there, but that's just one idea about potentially why the PS4 feels worse than PC that I was thinking about as I went over all this.
That's 16.66 milliseconds will simulate all those frames. Because we're supporting 7 frames of rollback, that's 8 total frames simulated in 16.66 milliseconds in our worst case. So both guys are doing the exact same thing. Superman is punching on both screens, and off they go. They're synced up.
Cool,
A little comparison between rollback.
Anyways. Is that why something that looks like an electric just came out of nowhere? Probably. I think that, you know, because like we've never really gotten like any information about what kind of networking, what do you call this? Technology concept they're using. Framework. I'm gonna call it a framework. Rollback networking is a framework. Then, you know, we don't really know. And because we don't know, it's hard to say. That's why when we see things, we don't really know. Like, we just be like, what the fuck? You know, but that's why we're saying what's funny, because we don't actually have knowledge about what it's supposed to be. Weren't there some weird async stuff in Tekken 7 already when one guy won match, another playing one more on that match breaks connection? Yeah. And all those things could happen in rollback too. Why would Tekken be more intense for the PS4 and MK11 isn't when it's newer and has higher spec requirements? I know that my shitty PC struggles with MK11 but handles Tekken 7 easily. I mean, your shitty PC might struggle with MK11 for graphics reasons, not CPU reasons. You know, like different games have different requirements or different, not even necessarily requirements, but different loads that they place on the graphics versus the CPU or the memory or everything, you know? Ironically, the PS4 natively storing the game states because of the share stuff. I don't think that's the same thing. They're saving like maybe videos or snapshots, but they're not saving the state of the actual engine. No wonder crossplay isn't as easy as people think. That too. Tag 2 had rollback, Sailor Twift, like that. And when I say it has rollback, I'm talking about from my experience playing it and seeing life bars like go red and come back to normal, you know. And that happened a lot more in Tag 2 than it's ever happened to me in Tekken 7. Sona says this is what Street Fighter 5 players talk about when they talk about teleporting. That's poor rollback. Oh yeah, Street Fighter 5's rollback is notoriously bad, which is why I didn't think Tekken 7 had rollback, because it didn't ever teleport like anywhere near as bad, right? So I've seen one example. Somebody sent me a tweet. I don't know if I still have it open. It looks like I don't. Let me show you. I think I have it. I think I bookmarked it so I can find it. Here we go. So this is the only example of rollback I've seen. Somebody linked me this tweet recently, right? It's right here. So it's right here. You'll see this. Right, this guy does this. You can see it's a very laggy game already, right? But he does this. And did you see that right there? The life bar when red came back. What? See? This is the only time I've ever seen this. I've never seen it myself. I've never experienced this myself. What the fuck? Right? So that's the only time I've seen that happen in Tekken 7. I've never seen it myself. In Tekken Tag 2, I've seen that plenty. I've seen that plenty in Tekken Tag 2. Yeah, so that's the only... That was the first time that I saw it, and I thought, man, maybe Tekken 7 does have rollback. Giga Turok says, I had that happen to me, you had a KO rollback. See, so whatever it is, Tekken 7 is pretty impressive, right? Because we don't have crazy rollbacks, which is a good thing, right? Like, you don't want your rollback to be teleporting around and all that kind of shit. That would be, like, disastrous, I think. So I'd prefer to have it like this than, like, say, Street Fighter 5, where, you know, people are hella teleporting around. Tekken 7 having rollback explains the desync more too, I think. Exactly. So when I saw that clip, when I thought about the desyncs, I was like, wait a second. I think we already have rollback, you know? And then I was like, but why is it worse than Tekken Tag 2? And I started thinking about Tag 2, and I started thinking about all the stages and how we didn't have the stuff on the stages. And I was like, why didn't they have, like, tuna fish on the boat? Like, that's nothing. Like, why can't they just run that separately? You know, that doesn't have to be synced up across, you know, the player base. Like, it doesn't matter if my fish are in the same place as your fish, right? They're not gameplay relevant. But it's not about being synced up. It's about using the CPU for those resources to do them even. You know, that's what it was about. Why would they hide this though? That's my question. Like, why don't, like, when you know, people ask multiple times, like, you know, Harada, please put GGPO in Tekken or something, right? Like, why didn't you just be like, we already have implemented rollback netcode since Tekken Tag 2? I don't know why. Maybe it's proprietary. I don't know. Trade secrets from NRS? It's not trade secrets because they literally had a public talk on GDC that's on their YouTube channel that anyone can watch. Like, literally, like, I'm trying to explain how crazy this video is, right? Like, I watched this video, right? And you know, you go through this whole video and you can see stuff like this. Like object lifetime, defer deletion, delete versus delete and recreate, right? They literally go through the things that they had to do and the pros and cons of doing these different ways to implement rollback netcode. And I was like, holy shit. They're telling you all the problems they had in trying to implement this so that you don't have these problems. So that you can just be like, this is what we should do. You know, it's an amazing panel. And I thought to myself, like, dude, I can use this to do this myself. And I'm not like some super godlike programmer. You know, I've never coded anything for networking. But I saw this and I thought, like, I can do this. You know? So yeah. It's crazy, dude. Dom, press the button. Thank you very much for 28-month subscription. But yeah, I mean, if there's any fighting game developer out there, and you know that you're waiting for a game from them, and you know their netcode sucks ass, link them this shit. And hopefully they have people who speak English that can read and understand it, because this shit is a huge resource for any developer that is that has never implemented rollback or has implemented rollback and wants to see what they can do to improve their rollback. Form Master Fenter says, just want to say hi. I'm recently bought Tekken 7, enjoyed a lot, and led me to watch every tournament of the year. Love your commentary, keep it up, and much love from Germany. Yo, what's good, Germany? I was in Germany earlier this year. I had a lot of fun out there. I hope to go back one day. Sona says, I've heard the NRS rollback criticized because it has like 3 frames of lag always, whereas Skullgirl doesn't. The 3 frames of lag always is like the built-in buffer that they put in so that the game is more consistent offline and online. You know, and 3 frames is not much. So I think it's fine. Blam Goatee says, poorly implemented rollback netcode is just bad netcode. Maybe that is why they don't want to advertise it. I don't think Tekken 7's is bad though. I think that Tekken 7's is actually pretty damn good. It's just not as good as it used to be. But it's not by much. Does that mean in an ideal scenario, an online NRS match will have 3 frames of latency? Not online. In an ideal scenario, in an offline NRS match, you'll have 3 frames of latency always. Right? So I guess maybe you're right. Maybe yeah, in an online environment, you'll at best have 3 frames of latency, which is what it's like offline. I think that Tekken Tag 2 felt better than this, yeah. I still, like, I'm so curious, code-wise, you know, which is something they don't have to disclose to the public, right? And I understand that. But I'm very curious about why the PC is so much better than the PS4. Like, after doing all this research and studying, I am pretty sure it's because of some kind of hardware limitation on the console. Zen Tranquil, when you're asking the question wrong. So you're saying that they make the 3 frames of network latency appear as the built-in latency. They already pad that into the game. So when you're playing offline, there's already 3 frames of latency, if you want to think about it that way. Like, the game is already going to slow down your inputs by 3 frames. It's not a significant amount. It's just so that when you play online, they already expect you're going to have some latency, right? Because if they had 0 frames of offline latency and you played online, you're always going to feel like, dude, what the fuck, man? You know? So that's why they put in that small buffer to be like, well, it's only 3 frames out of 60, right? You're talking about 1/20th of a second. That, you know, like, you have to, like, you won't be able to necessarily feel it, but it'll make you feel better when you play it online versus offline, which is what Tekken 7 did. But Tekken 7 made it way worse. Like, they added so many frames. I don't know how many it was, but it was a shit ton. Could it be possible that PS4 users in general have worse network stability than PC users? No, it's not that. Because me and Run It Black can play on PC together, and it's good. And then me and him can also play each other on a PS4, and it's way worse. You know what I mean? So it's not about, like, oh, PS4 users have more Wi-Fi or some shit. It's just literally the system with the same game, with the same 2 people on the same networks is worse, you know? Games that want good online shouldn't try for close to 0 frames of input lag anymore. Yeah, Narnagi, that's like, that's kind of like an accepted belief. And I think that developers decided that like a couple years ago. Well, there was some data that came out and console users were on Wi-Fi way more frequently than PC players in MK11. Of course, that I'm saying is irrelevant. Like, I know that console has way more Wi-Fi users, right? They're casuals, you know? They put their PS4s by their televisions. Of course, they don't have a router there, you know? So that's what it is. There's more Wi-Fi users on consoles than there are on PC. However, like, that doesn't affect what I'm saying here about, like, Tekken 7 specifically on PC versus PS4. You're saying they added input delay for offline? Or am I hearing this wrong? I'm saying most games do that already. I guess a great question regarding PS4 hardware limitation would be looking how the game runs on Xbox online. Yeah. Although, you know, my experience has been that Xbox generally runs everything better. And I'm talking about Xbox 360 versus PS3. Tekken Tag 2 on Xbox 360 felt better than Tekken Tag 2 on PS3, for sure. Narnog said, also, you notice how they announced that crossplay for PS4 is now possible and then announced PS5? Makes me think they won't have crossplay on PS5 since they're separate announcements. I think you're not looking at all the information there, because the PS4 announcement didn't come from Sony directly. It came from an IGN article that said that Sony didn't officially announce it, but that it's out of beta now. You know, Mega Deathfist said, "Hey Rip, Tekken 7 is a sick ass game either way." Exactly. Hey, by the way, I have a T-shirt for sale. Wow, why am I so big here? You guys see it? It look it like this. Nice, huh?